What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, February 13th, 2019, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Powwow on a Friday. We have got a lot to talk about today. It's been a very, very busy news day. A lot of little things happening all over that we've got to look at. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone and put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. And of course, a reminder, tomorrow is Valentine's Day. So those of you who have significant others, make the appropriate plans and arrangements or face the wrath of your partner scorned, as it were here. All right, well, the news today, of course, is still thrashing around this compromise border deal the Democrats have come up with, which is basically Trump has already tweeted out he's not pleased with it. He's not happy. And we're getting mixed reports about whether he's going to sign it or not. And it's going back and forth a couple of different ways. CNN is saying he's going to sign it. The White House is saying they're not sure. But basically, the compromise includes $1.3 billion for fencing along the border. So it's not a wall. It's not the $5.7 billion. And it's actually even less than the deal he rejected last December, which triggered that 35-day partial government shutdown. So, according to sources over at IntelliHub, and actually according to the Washington Post, Trump is going to use an executive order to reallocate federal funds to finance the wall, or at least something more than the 55 miles that the compromise bill would finance. When they say a fence, what they're talking about is called a bollard fence, which is these steel posts that are driven into the ground, and they're too close together for anybody to get through other than a little tiny baby. And so that's what the compromise is going to be. Now, Ted Cruz is out there reviving the El Chapo bill. This was something that he introduced back in 2017, and he brought it back because of the conviction of El Chapo on all 10 counts. And prosecutors are seeking the seizure of $14 billion in drug profits and other assets from the drug lord. And Cruz is saying we can use that money to build the border wall. And I think it's an excellent idea. Ted scored on this one. Now, when Trump was down there in El Paso for his rally, and it was a huge rally, and there was a huge crowd outside who was not able to get on in, he made this statement that the wall is currently being built, and a lot of people were saying, well, that's just rhetoric. But it turned out over at the Rio Grande Valley border sector, there was, in fact, construction on a new border wall. And it was started last year. The project funds 6 miles worth of concrete and steel barrier, and it is immensely successful in deterring illegal border crossings. The problem is when they talk about 6 miles here and 55 miles here, that's really, it's nothing. The human traffickers are simply going to drive further down until they can go around the border. It has to be a single contiguous solid fence all the way from San Diego to the Rio Grande, and then toss some crocodiles in the Rio Grande for good measure. Because Trump is right, and he was on TV just a little while ago. This open border is a major problem for our country, and it is time to just deal with it. In other news, it looks like, for all intents and purposes, that Russiagate is over and done with. And we've had to listen to this for more than 2 years as Democrat politicians, the corporate media, and some bloggers, some in the independent media, kept claiming that Russia had somehow colluded with the Trump campaign to get him elected. Now, they had this obviously fake dirty dossier about Trump, which was paid for by the Clinton campaign and involved Russian collusion on their side, was presented as evidence. Regular business contacts between Trump flunkies, for lack of a better word, and people in Ukraine or Russia were claimed to be proof of nefarious deals. And there was this Russian clickbait company was accused of manipulating the U.S. electorate by posting puppy pictures and crazy memes on social media. Huge investigations were launched. Every rumor or irrelevant detail was declared to be finally the evidence that would put Trump into the slammer, or at least out of the Oval Office. Every month we were told the walls were closing in on Trump. And, of course, the very real Trump actions that were hurting Russia were ignored. But it looks like the whole thing has run out of steam because, as we mentioned yesterday, the Senate Intelligence Committee came on out with their final report and said they found zero evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And Democrats across the country are wailing and gnashing their teeth. The snowflakes are out there kneading their Play-Doh and popping their blister pack and just having a total, complete meltdown. They were so convinced this was going to be it. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So after 2 years of investigations, 200 interviews, the Senate Intelligence Committee said there's no there. It is a big nothing burger on a gluten-free bun. And now even Democrats are having to come up and say, yeah, it does look like there was no collusion. What is really enjoyable, though, is watching the faces of these prostitutes and correspondents on corporate media, as they have to report this, because they've been at the forefront of saying, yes, Trump was colluding, it was out there. And now we get to watch them kind of squirm and try and hem and haw and say, well, there were the contacts, there may, the Senate Intelligence Committee, maybe they failed, and they're trying to make sense of all this. Now, the latest word we're getting is that Robert Mueller's investigation into collusion is wrapping up, and that their final report may not even be made public, meaning they didn't find anything either. Getting on back to the corporate media, polls are showing that this constant all-out assault on Trump is actually hurting the corporate media. It's hurting trust in the corporate media. Yesterday we were talking about this article that pointed out over the last few weeks, all of a sudden, these references to Hitler and Nazis and fascism, these allusions to Trump were sort of fading away. And one theory was that Trump had somehow curried the favor of the deep state, and the other theory, which I put on out there, was everybody's tired of hearing that, and it looks like that may be exactly what happened. And the media has realized that this constant assault on the President of the United States of America is destroying their image of being unbiased and objective in reporting. And so, according to these polls, half of the U.S. public lost trust in the media over the past 2 years. And now you know why they are so desperate to try and shut the independent media down. Because they want to protect their profits. They want their audience back. Good luck on that one here. Anyway, John Dowd, who was this veteran criminal defense attorney, he headed Trump's legal team during a crucial stretch of Mueller's investigation. He thinks the entire affair is going to end in silence from Mueller. And he says this whole 2-year probe was a terrible waste of time. Just knock it off and get it done. And John Dowd was on ABC, and he says, I don't think there'll be a report. I'll be shocked if anything regarding the president is made public, other than we're done. Meanwhile, of course, there is the question, what about the very well-documented collusion between the Hillary Clinton campaign and various Russian parties? How about Uranium One? Why aren't those being looked at? Those are important questions. And if you feel like, making a phone call to your congressional representatives, those are questions to ask. Where's the investigation into Uranium One? Where's the investigation into the Democrats' collusion with Russia back in 2016? Why is it constantly one-sided here? Now, needless to say, Donald Trump is out there on his Twitter feed celebrating the fact that the Senate Intelligence Committee has basically exonerated him. And So he's due a little bit of a celebration there. Now then, remember Maria Butina. She is this Russian gun rights activist who pled guilty to acting as an unregistered Russian agent. And she's now gone public over at the New Republic, basically saying she's not a spy. You know, she was involved in lobbying for the NRA, and she came on out and said if she was really a spy, she would have kept her private life secret. It doesn't make sense that she would be out there so publicly visible. That's not how spies operate. But she's out there denying the claim that she was a spy. So let's talk a little bit more about Ilhan Omar. And a lot of people are still talking about this firestorm of pressure that is being brought to bear on her. I mean, even Donald Trump is saying she should resign. How dare she say these things about AIPAC giving money to American politicians? You know, the fact that it's true is no defense. It's still anti-Semitism here. And what's really going on here is AIPAC and Israel, they're afraid the debate might open up. When you have a member of Congress saying it's time to look at Israel's influence in our politics, it's time to look at Israel's meddling in our politics, they're going to get afraid. Because, yeah, Israel's been messing in our politics forever, going back at least as far as Harry Truman. But they kept it out of the eyes of the American people. The American people have been lulled into believing that the government in Washington, D.C. still represents we, the people. That Washington, D.C. is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And now the American people are waking up and realizing that's not true. We are under foreign puppet rule. We have a Vichy government. So Representative Omar, and she did apologize, but she has not retracted. And again, it was just amazing to see how many members of, Congress and the government general just attacked her. How dare you call attention to AIPAC? You can't do that. So people are saying, was it anti-Semitic? No, it wasn't. And even more important, not only is it protected by her status as a member of the House of Representatives, it's protected by the First Amendment. We have a First Amendment right to ask, what is Israel's influence in our government? It's a legitimate question. And by the way, have you noticed the double standard that's going on here? Remember Stephen King, Representative Stephen King? He got kicked off some of his committees for defending the terms white supremacist and white nationalist. But nobody called on him to resign. But boy, they're after Omar. They absolutely. Now, here's what's really interesting. If you go back to that documentary that Al Jazeera did about the lobby, and it was never broadcast, but it has been released, and as a matter of fact, it's in 4 segments on the front of whatreallyhappened.com right now. And in one of those segments, they actually catch the pro-Israel lobby on tape boasting about how its money influences Washington, D.C. So it is all about the Benjamins. Everyone wants to know, how does Israel have so much power over the world? Because they've got the money. And politicians, as a general class, will sell their own mother for $1. So, another article, different observation. This is from wakethechurch.org, saying that the Israeli lobby is the deep state. That they're basically calling the shots on pretty much everything, and they're protecting their protectors. Now, I don't know about that, because obviously if Israel was the deep state, they wouldn't have been going after Donald Trump, because he's one of the most pro-Israel presidents we've ever had here. There's a new bit of spin, though, coming out in the corporate media. Okay, and it's coming out from, obviously, Israel supporters saying, well, yeah, we've got a lot of money, but we don't really have that much power. It's really the Christian evangelicals that are putting pressure on the U.S. government to do all these things for Israel. So you want to go talk to them and leave us alone. It's all their fault. Anyway. Okay, story out of Information Clearinghouse. It's reporting on a company, Psy Group, and it is a defunct private intelligence agency in Israel, and it was caught attempting to influence at least one local U.S. election and other domestic affairs. They even courted President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, and they are now under investigation by Robert Mueller, according to The New Yorker. So apparently the company also tried to influence local elections in the U.S. in favor of private clients using smear campaigns and other methods, including fake websites and online avatars, to change the election outcome. Representative Omar hit it right on the head, and that's why everybody's freaking out. If she'd come on out and said, you know, there are space aliens building a base on the moon, everybody said, oh, okay, fine. You start telling the truth in Washington, D.C., you are a target here. Now, Tulsi Gabbard is basically out there, again, talking about how bad all these wars are. And, of course, the corporate media is trying to paint her as a Russian stooge for daring to oppose the endless series of regime changes. And again, Tulsi Gabbard, of all the Democrats running so far, she's the only one who actually served in combat. She's the only one who got to see her friends die in front of her. And she's out there talking about how she wants to stop these warmongers in their ivory towers. Okay, let's take a phone call. Mark in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you know, the Jim Trafficker said that Israel was our friend, even though AIPAC is talking candidly about how AIPAC, which is not Israel, which I concur with the A Jewish Voice for Peace has this little graphic where it shows some cute Jewish kids, and it said, we're Jewish, and the caption reads, we're Jewish, and AIPAC does not speak for us. And that's the thing, is that what we need to be emphatically clear is there are informed Jews like Sir Gerald Kaufman, that's Kaufma, I think it's one N or two at the end, but he went on record that he was himself a Holocaust survivor. So when he says that in his countless times that he's been to the Holy Land, the Israelis treat the Palestinians the way the Nazis treated the Jews.
Yes,
so
I
he's
remember
a guy
that.
who knows what he's talking about. So the thing we need to be clear is we are in agreement with Jews of good conscience. The issue is not that we're against Jews, who most modern Jews are as Yephitic as I am. And you're Semitic, and you generally don't make an issue of it because it's like, what difference does that make? And I'm like, exactly. But I think it was like 1880, it was in the late 19th century that the term anti-Semitic was first used, and it wouldn't surprise me if it came from somebody like Theodor Herzl, who himself said that anti-Semitism would be their friend, and they would actually create anti-Semitism to make an appeal to pity.
Yes.
And I'm like, yes, there is such a thing, but it's largely manufactured. It's not organic. It's not that Muslims hate Jews. A lot of the hostility is because there are certain criminal elements, and that's where, when I say switch, take the word Jew, spell it backwards, and by that I mean people who, although they call themselves Jews, behave more like Satan's chosen people than God's chosen people. And as long as Jews behave like God's chosen people, as long as they behave like they're going to stand accountable before God, hey, my concern is soteriological. It's like your soul, you're responsible for your soul just like I'm responsible for mine.
Okay, well, Mark...
But I guess as an atheist, you're not going into that too much, right?
Well, no, but Mark, we're almost at a commercial break here, but I want to keep this discussion in the political realm and not the religious realm,
Right.
because that's when we talk about AIPAC,
Right.
we're talking politics. We're not talking Jewish people. We're not talking religion. Anyway, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm watching this clash going on. It's on Fox News right now. I don't know if it's on the other media, but this has to do with the House Foreign Affairs hearing, looking into what's going on in Venezuela, and Representative Omar is there, And she is very tough. She went right after Elliot Abrams, asking him, to detail his role in the Iran-Contra scandal. And he's squirming. Boy, she's tough. She is very tough. Okay, getting on back to the news here. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has basically lobbed a bombshell into the 2020 Democratic primary. He is going to call for a vote on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. And, of course, there's no chance it's going to pass, but what he wants to do is get Democrats on the record for having supported it. And, of course, if no Democrats support it, then it's a major block against Alexandria, her rising star. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens there. That being said, that it's going to be fun to watch. I really am concerned that the political infighting has really come to dominate everybody's life in Washington, D.C., to the neglect and decay of our nation. And also, basically, it's eroding their supposed oversight over the military, over what's going on in these various wars. Congress is supposed to be in charge of the wars, at least in charge of starting and stopping them. Haven't done that. Down in Virginia, Governor Ralph Northam is planning a listening tour to meet with citizens as his blackface scandal continues, and he vows to remain in his post. And again, this is feeling like a hatchet job. Okay, we're talking about something that happened back in 1984. And again, times change, sensibilities change, customs change. I mean, look at how the liberal snowflakes have made everything offensive now. Didn't used to be that way. Used to live in a world where if somebody did something that, was a little questionable, you just shrug your shoulders and you go on. That was it. You had a thick hide back then. But they're still pushing that whole blackface thing. And again, as I mentioned before, I'm sure every one of us can go look through our past to things we did that when we were young, that were okay when we were young, but would be denounced today. What are we all supposed to be? Psychic? Are we supposed to be standing around there saying, oh, I'd like to do this, but 20 years from now, I'm going to have somebody come up and demand I resign as governor because of it. It doesn't work that way. Now, the concern here is that the Republicans, because they are not opposing these politically correct feeding frenzies, it's turning out to a victory for the Democrats down there in Virginia. Trump just isn't getting it with that scandal. And it's being turned into another weapon. It's being turned into another weapon here. Now, publicly supporting President Trump is starting to become very dangerous. And apparently, there was this gentleman named Randall was live streaming at the Amy Klobuchar event. While he was doing that, somebody went onto his farm and shot his husky that's named Donald J. Trump. So now it's down to killing each other's dogs here. Okay. Now then, do you remember Beth Inabinit? She was the woman who assaulted Kellyanne Conway last October. And she's basically facing a trial next month for second-degree assault. It turns out she is married to the CEO of a $43 million environmental charity and manages volunteers for a nonprofit that boasts empathy as a priority skill for living and working together in this radically different world. Well, it sounds really good, but clearly does not walk her talk. And apparently she might actually be charged with a federal crime. And again, we were seeing people just literally being incited to violence by Democrats like Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi. That's incitement, and incitement to violence is a crime, and people were becoming violent. I'm glad that phase seems to be fading out right now. But it shows you what trouble our society's in. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back with a phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the telephones to Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I haven't had any problems with my pet. I named my pet. I named my pet after the President of the United States. His name's Benjamin. Mike, quickly, that song about steel, was that written by Claire?
Oh, which song again?
The song about the steel being taken away and the holes left?
Oh, no, that was written by Thanea Crone. It's from her album Kaleidoscope, and she did. It was inspired by my website.
It's a beautiful song. Mike, yeah, we are going to see in 2020, I mean, we thought 2016 was bad. We are going to see some serious violence on Election Day and in the following days if Trump should get reelected, because I think based on what we've seen thus far throughout the first 2 years, I think we're going to hit full third world banana republic mode following that 2020 election.
We're pretty close to that right now, unfortunately.
And Mike, last question. First, that Omar, the woman that Omar in Congress, I like her for what she's saying about AIPAC, but on the problem is with people like her and her ilk on all the other issues, she's insane. She's completely for open borders. She's a gun grabber. It just seems like the people who say the right things about Israel and the power, the influence that they have in this country, they're completely, insane when it comes to every other issue.
Well, I have to confess that I'm not familiar with Omar's positions on those various issues. I'm going to have to go take a look and see what it is she's actually saying. But again, anybody who talks about Israel's influence over our government, they're smeared, they're denounced. It's just full on, full court press to destroy them. Anyway, Joe, thanks enough.
My last question.
Okay.
Last question. I wanted to ask you about, if you can get into this later or this week, I always hear about fascism and Hitler's Germany, but yet it seemed like wealth was very evenly distributed in Hitler's Germany. The workers were compensated well. They were given state-paid vacations. How does that differ? I mean, is it wrong to say that the system in Germany was fascist?
Oh,
it
absolutely.
Seems like the workers were...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, after all, it was the National Socialist Party. The fascists were down in Italy. And the difference between socialism and fascism is really very simple. If you make money under socialism, it's taxed away to benefit the general society. If you lose money under socialism, society is taxed to cover the losses so you can pick up and start again. Okay?
Right,
Under
right.
fascism, if you make money, you get to keep it. And if you lose money, the society is taxed to cover the losses, which is what we have here with TARP and all the rest of these other things following the 2008 meltdown. No, it's incorrect to say that Nazi Germany was a fascist regime. They were socialist.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Get on back here to the news. Okay, now getting on back to politics and corruption. There's this group called the Committee to Defend the President, and yesterday they filed a motion in a D.C. federal court to supplement the complaint it filed against the Federal Election Committee. I'm sorry, I think that's the Federal Election Commission in April of 2018. And in its original complaint, they alleged that the agency responsible for enforcing campaign finance law failed to act on an administrative complaint that had been filed with the FEC. That complaint charged that during the 2016 presidential elections, Democrats illegally funneled approximately $84 million through the Hillary Victory Fund to the Democratic National Committee, which then illegally coordinated with the Hillary Clinton campaign. And to this date, the FEC is still refusing to investigate. And I remember back then when that all came on out. I mean, all kinds of violations of election law. So, is warning him against meddling in Venezuela's internal affairs. And Lavrov said basically when discussing urgent foreign policy issues, I'm sorry, this is badly written, bad grammar. Basically what he's out there is saying that Russia is opposed to any interference in Venezuela's home affairs. So is China. A few other countries have come on out. And here's where it gets really bizarre out there because Senate Armed Services Committee Chair Jim Inhofe basically stated, hands off our hemisphere. This is his warning to Russia. Hands off our hemisphere or Venezuela pays the price. Now, you want to talk about an absurd statement when you realize that the United States military is all over the globe, including in other people's hemispheres. But that's what he's saying. And basically his point of issue is he's concerned that Russia might set up a military base in Venezuela, which they had been talking about doing before this whole Guido thing came on up. So apparently, Venezuelan opposition is saying they've received their first blocked aid shipments in defiance of Maduro. They're not saying how it received, where it came from, or what was in it, but they're saying that, yes, they're getting the supplies in. Whether or not that's going to get to the Venezuelan people, I don't know. I was sort of peeking at Venezuela through Google Earth, and there's a lot of people there. Anyway, latest poll from Venezuela, 57% of the respondents say Nicolas Maduro is the legitimate president. 32% said it's Juan Guaido. 11% did not know or did not respond. So basically, Maduro has a 2-to-1 edge in the polls right now. I'm surprised Guaido got that much, and I'm wondering if the poll was being intentionally skewed to try and generate better numbers for Guaido. But they didn't get him here. Meanwhile, of course, Mike Pompeo was still out there trying to basically build a case for going into Venezuela by saying, well, you know, the Iranians are in there, and Hezbollah has cells in there, and Maduro has a Death Star, and, you know, basically just trying to find something that's going to get some traction for the American people. And I think the fact that he's getting this desperate tells us there is no traction. The American people do not support yet another war in another country that has not done anything to us. But the propaganda is starting to get to hysteric levels, actually. Now, the other day, there was a report that came on out in the U.S. media, in fact, the Wall Street Journal, saying that China was already in talks with Guaido about continuing trade and making sure that China's loans got paid off. China felt compelled to issue a statement saying, no, that's absolutely false. They are doing business with Maduro, and they are not talking with the opposition. And then the Wall Street Journal wonders why Americans are losing trust in the media. Okay, yesterday I made the observation that it may be that Donald Trump was just going along with the flow regarding Venezuela. But as it turns out, an alert listener corrected me on this and found this story in The Guardian from last year, where Trump was apparently talking about invading Venezuela in talks with his top aides. And apparently he was rather persistent about it, and it actually shocked a lot of his staffers that he wanted to do that. So I guess it was his idea after all. And Trump, for all of his talk about getting out of foreign entanglements, during his campaign. He wants to be a war president. We're going to have more wars. We're going to have another war over here. Over in Syria, Russia is now demanding that the United States pull their troops out of Syria. They're saying, fulfill your pledge. And tensions continue to rise in the area. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said, we insist the United States should fulfill its pledge and fully withdraw from Syria. And this comes a day after Iran threatened to start hitting U.S. bases if Washington fails to withdraw from Damascus. Well, you know, Washington did promise, when ISIS and Al-Qaeda are gone, we will leave. And ISIS and Al-Qaeda are pretty much gone. But then, you know, Washington has never been very good about keeping their promises. And of course, Iran would be foolish to launch an attack against the U.S. base in Syria. That's exactly what the United States would want, because that would trigger the war against Iran, which everybody seems to be gearing up for. Now, Syria, over at the United Nations, is reiterating its demands for the Security Council to take action against the coalition's continued crimes against Syria. And they're going through the motions, but we all know that the U.S. will veto anything the Security Council tries to do. I think they need to change the rules of how that Security Council operates here. Apparently, there's been another massacre of civilians over in Deir ez-Zor. 70 civilians have been killed or injured by an airstrike, and apparently mostly women and children. And apparently the coalition's airstrikes targeted a camp that embraces hundreds of civilians who fled the shelling by the coalition and the terrorism of ISIS. So that, I think, would count as a war crime. And apparently, the jihadist rebels are starting to use chemical weapons against the Syrian army in southeast Idlib, and apparently a number of soldiers have been hospitalized after jihadist rebels of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham fired chemical substances toward their garrison in southeast Idlib. Okay. Now, apparently, well, as you know, over in Congress, there is a bill that is garnering a lot of support. It was working as a proxy, but this war has just gone very bad. The optics are really bad. Everybody's saying it's time for it to stop. And so Congress wants to pass a bill to cut off all funding or all military aid for Saudi Arabia. Trump is basically saying he's probably going to veto this bill. And Democrats and Republicans reintroduced this war power resolution 2 weeks ago, trying to send a strong message to Riyadh about the humanitarian disaster in Yemen, as well as more payback for the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So it's getting tense over there. But see, from the point of view of Saudi Arabia, the humanitarian disaster is part of the war plan. And we're seeing the same thing being planned for Venezuela, to starve them into changing their government. That's exactly, and that will lead to a humanitarian disaster. Now, a story has come on out from the Telegraph how apparently hundreds of Saudi police officers were trained in Britain last year, despite claims that the skills they'd acquire could help the regime commit torture. So this apparently all took place at the College of Policing, which is supposed to set the standards for UK police forces, and it's increasing its work with Saudi Arabia. So the Telegraph found 268 Saudi police officers attended British training sessions between January and October of last year. So now the British are out there teaching the Saudis how to commit torture. There's another resolution in Congress regarding Saudi Arabia. This one is aiming to stop Saudi Arabia from acquiring nuclear weapons. As you know, Saudi Arabia started talking nuclear weapons when Trump pulled out of the P5+1 deal. But now there's this new bipartisan resolution that is aimed at blocking Saudi Arabia by placing severe restrictions on Saudi activities if they accept a U.S. civilian nuclear cooperation deal, which sounds an awful lot to me like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty reborn. So apparently this cooperation deal has been in progress for a while, and Congress wants to add these restrictions to it so that Saudis do not get the bomb, because only Israel is allowed to have the bomb in the Middle East. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
You know, Mike, you look at what's gone on in the Middle East. Like, you know, just from the drone footage of Syria.
Oh, yeah.
Iraq.
They've
Libya,
just wrecked the place.
Yeah, Yemen, Europe with Ukraine. But you just look, the British, the United States, the French. It's just a wrecking ball of death. I mean, what's been accomplished? You know what I mean? Like, it's just. I think, Mike. You know, we keep saying, oh, there's all these. You know, oh, they misjudge. I don't agree with that anymore. I think it's just all intentional. I think it's just all to wreck these places. That's what I think. There's no way you can make this many misjudgments over and over and over. You know what I mean? Like in Ukraine,
I know what you mean, but again, part of the way the war profiteers profit from war is not just selling the weapons that blow up the other country, but then going on in, loaning them money, and then getting that money back to rebuild their country. That's always part of that whole process. And so, yeah, wrecking the other country is definitely part of the overall plan. Anyway, listen, Dustin, stay on the line. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. And let's wait for the music to tail on out there. There we are. So, Dustin, can you just sort of pick up where you left off?
Well, I wanted to switch to Trump with Saudi Arabia. Mike, I was home the day of 9/11. I watched people falling out of the buildings. My friend was in New York, and you look with the Israelis involved with the cross from the Hudson, with the FBI raid on that front rug company. Remember? I saw the white van pulled over on George Washington Parkway.
Yeah, it was a moving and storage company here, but here's something to keep in mind. Remember the story that we did just the other day, where this former it was either a diplomat or intelligence official came on out and said that Saudi Arabia and Israel have actually had secret relations going back 25 years. In fact, Israel's got secret relations with a lot of these countries, which are probably going to come to the fore with this Warsaw Mideast summit. And I pointed out at the time, I mean, Israel's always screaming, you know, we're being threatened by our neighboring nations. Give us more military equipment, give us more money. And it was a joke all the time because they were all in cahoots together.
Along with Britain and France, because remember, Mike, all those fighters are allowed to leave Britain and France and go back along with the white helmets, right, to Canada, to them, to go back to living normal lives after they kill people in Syria.
Yeah.
It just tells you what's going on. But, I mean, Mike, with Saudi Arabia, I mean, my God, I mean, you would think Trump would say, you know what, like, you know, hey, man, we're selling them lots, you know, they're buying some of our weapons and stuff, you know, hey, it's business. I mean, this is the mentality, not just Trump, but the whole system thinks. Britain and France, they sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. The Wahhabists. I'm not blaming the people of Saudi Arabia because not everybody's a Wahhabist, but we all know like who the players are, and it's Israel, Saudi Arabia, Britain, France, and the United States. That's the bulk of it, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, nothing's done. Nothing's like to stop. Remember during the Boston bombing with the Sarnaw brother? He went to Dagestan like a dozen times, right?
Yeah.
Come back. The Russians warned us. The FBI and the CIA, they did what? Nothing. Because
he was an asset. He was an asset.
Yes.
I mean, that's very obvious
Yep.
that he was a U.S. asset, and then they set him up and used him as a patsy.
But his uncle was a weapons smuggler for the CIA, I think, also.
Yeah.
So his family was involved in. But I'm saying, like, what's changed? Like, I know there's some people calling in who still support Trump. What's changed? Like, I would have cut them off a long time ago. You know, but nobody is. You know, like,
Well,
I mean, why would
it's
you arm
unfortunately,
people?
it's all about, as Omar says, it's all about the Benjamins. And unfortunately, we live in a world where the money power has come to rule. And it's overriding civil government, it's overriding democracies, and it's weapons money, it's oil money, it's pipeline right-of-way money. Anyway, Dustin, got to let you go. Got to do a station identification break. Got another caller waiting on the line. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a phone call from Dan in Washington State. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking the call, Mike. I just called about the Monroe Doctrine. I heard a lot of people kind of using that to justify interference in Venezuela, and in the media and stuff. And then I looked into it though, and basically it says the doctrine was we would have the right to keep any European power from going into South America, but
Yes.
on condition that. But the other side was that we wouldn't interfere in Europe's affairs. So to me, that whole doctrine was null and void, like in World War I.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
probably even before that.
Yeah, so it's just, I don't know, that whole, it's just a stupid argument. That was a long time ago when Monroe lived, you know?
Yes.
So I don't know. But so am I correct there? I mean, that's what it's saying, right? I mean, are people actually using that? They say it like that's our policy or something, but they don't look at the other side.
No, they don't know what's
already
actually in it. I mean, somebody just says, Monroe Doctrine says we can do this, and everyone says, okay, the Monroe Doctrine says we can do this. And they don't actually look at it. And you're absolutely right. The Monroe Doctrine was rendered null and void by U.S. interference in Europe, at least starting with World War I.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks. That was my main point on that thing. So it's just interesting they keep bringing that up. You know, they just, like you said, they just keep repeating it and repeating it.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for taking the call.
All right, you got it. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go and go to Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. A couple of things on my mind. It wasn't too long ago that Trump was at 38%. And all of a sudden, Democrats really backed up the truck and really really dumped a lot of communism on the country. Then New Yorkers started cheering, having abortions outside the womb. I mean, I don't know here about this, but, you know, something, I smell a rat. You know, I've always said that, you know, it's a two-party system. I've always said that don't believe anything you see on TV. And I think this is all about keeping Trump in office. He went, I mean, how could you not want to, all of a sudden Trump shows up on his white horse, he's going to save babies, and he's going to stop socialism. Well, hell, he signed off on $500 million for Planned Parenthood. I mean, I found it kind of coincidental that all of a sudden, all this nonsense came out of the Democrat Party, and then they all started cheering, you know, killing babies. And then Trump, all of a sudden he's up to 52%, and his wall's only 55 miles long.
Well,
It's
I think
amazing.
what's going on is the Democratic Party right now, they're moving even further to the left, as evidenced by this stuff about you can, you know, have an abortion right up to the moment of birth. And I think most Americans are starting to turn off from that. And Trump, for all of his shortcomings and failings, you know, is still looking good to the American people, not because he's actually doing a better job, but because the Democrats appear to be kind of self-destructing, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, as far as the wall goes now, all parties concerned in this wall, always been, they've been planning on building a wall in the Rio Grande Valley down there for a long time because the abortion industry has basically been run out of the valley by the Mexicans. They've been torching the abortion clinics, threatening the doctors, and then they skip across the river. And this has been planned for a long time. And it's amazing how the wall has all came down to just that 55-mile stretch in the Rio Grande Valley. This has been planned a long time ago. If you think what's the new slogan? Finish that wall.
Yes.
Finish that wall. American people are really as unsophisticated as you possibly can get. Thanks for taking my call.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? You were just talking about connections possibly between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
I'm trying to find out much information that I can right now on the Talmud. I go to different websites and stuff, and basically in YouTube, and there's Israeli News Live, where this a guy who's a what do you call it again? A Masonic Jew. In other words, he believes in Jesus Christ.
Okay.
He doesn't,
A Christian Zionist.
And I guess you could. Well, no, he's not really a Christian Zionist either. No, he's against a lot of these wars. He talks against the New World Order. I mean, he's a good guy. I mean, it's a guy, Stephen Danoon is his name. But his wife gave a speech about the Talmud, and there's things about that Talmud. Evidently, there's two kinds of Talmud. There's one a Babylonian Talmud, and another they say is connected to the Torah, which is really the Old Testament.
Yes.
But this Talmud that seems to be followed in Israel, very similar to certain parts of the Quran. Like it's okay to lie to a non-Jew. It's they really curse out Jesus Christ. But
I got exposed to that kind of stuff during my first marriage, and some of it's pretty nasty.
But it's my opinion. I'm starting to think that there might be a connection through that Talmud and through the Wahhabi part of the Islamic religion with the Saudis. There's a connection between parts of Judaism, sort of cultish form of Judaism, and a cultish form of Islam, which have very similar, even the way they dress. Like you look at these, what do you call them, Chabad Lubavitches, man? And you look at the way they dress and stuff, and the way the women have to walk behind the men, and the what do you call it again? The Saudis, the way the Saudis run the things, very similar.
Well, there's a lot of cultural connections into the nations that we know as the Middle East today until the end of World War I. So, but I think overwhelmingly the main connection between these governments is political expediency and economics. And certainly, Israel would want to actually have good relations with those other nations, but needed to maintain that illusion of being under threat from them in order to extract more military aid from the United States. I think that's all that there is to it.
You might be right, Mike, but I have a sneaking suspicion that there's more to it than that. I even heard that, for instance, you talk about what do you call those people again? Central Europe, not Central Asia, the
Ashkenazi.
The Khazaris.
The Khazars, yes.
Yeah, there might be some connection there that the Saudis also might have some people coming from the Khazars or the Khazars, whatever they call themselves, and a certain amount of Jews.
Well, not really, because if you look at the Khazarians, who are now the Ashkenazi, they look Central Asian. They've got a very pale skin. They don't look Middle Eastern at all, as opposed to the Saudis, who very clearly come from Arabic, genetic lines.
Well, wait a minute, Mike. Look at the Georgians. Look at people look at the Turks. They don't look pale skinned to me at all. I mean, they're fairly dark, swarthy skinned people. The same thing with most of Central Asia. Some may be light skinned, even Iranians, which is really part of Iran.
Mark. Okay, I'm talking about if you look at the Ashkenazi Jewish population today, they have pale skin. They don't look Middle Eastern. The Saudis look Middle Eastern.
That's because
Mark, I think you're pushing a bad position here. I don't think there's anything to this idea. I think that this alliance, which was hidden, is based purely in politics and economics and expediency. Anyway, we're going to let you go. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now joining our network. So again, going on back a few days, there was this revelation that Israel has actually had secret relations with its Mideast neighbors, including Saudi Arabia, going back about 25 years. Well, now we've got this Mideast summit up in Warsaw, Poland. And Netanyahu is basically up there. This conference is co-hosted by the U.S. and Poland. It's supposed to overtly be focused on Mideast peace and security. Around 80 countries are participating, including Israel, but Iran was not invited, and that is very telling because Netanyahu is saying that the focus of this conference is going to be on Iran. And believe it or not, this story just came out in Russia Today. The Israel and Arab nations discuss common interests of war with Iran. So there it is. Everybody's going to get together and gang up and whoop on Iran. So anyway, meanwhile, Israel has sent another warning to Iran that Israel's missiles can travel very far. So they're rattling the sabers over there. If you are parents of military-aged children, get ready to say goodbye to them. They're going to have to do a draft. If they're going into Venezuela, which is some heavy bush, and they're getting ready to go into Iran, there's going to have to be a draft. The United States is simply spread too thin all over the world. We have military forces of varying sizes and capabilities in 39% of the world's nations. Speaking of Iran, there was a suicide attack that killed 20 members of the Revolutionary Guards, and it was a car bomb. And I'm wondering if this is the beginning of a destabilization campaign. Now, interestingly enough, up at the International Court of Justice, they have issued a ruling allowing Iran to proceed with their efforts to recover $2 billion in funds frozen by the United States. Now, this goes back to the P5+1 deal, where Iran agreed to all the requirements to curtail their nuclear activities and even limit the ones they're allowed under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the U.S. would unfreeze the funds and return the money. The U.S. never did. Now the U.S. is trying to hang on to the money by claiming that it's going to be paid to survivors and relatives of a 1983 terrorist attack in Lebanon, which the U.S. blamed on Iran, but provided absolutely no proof that it actually happened. There was even another case where the U.S. blamed Iran for 9/11. And said some of this money that we've frozen from Iranian assets is going to go to them. So the International Court of Justice may be having the final word on all of this. But again, it reinforces it's all driven by the money. It's all about grabbing the money and using that money to wield power, because that's what money is. It's tokenized power. You got enough money, you can get anybody to do anything here. Another little article, this is a look back, it's from truthout.org, and it's basically starting with the fact that Iran is just now celebrating the 40th anniversary of the 1979 revolution, where the Shah of Iran was driven from power and the Islamic Republic basically came into existence, at which point Iran went from being really good friends with the United States to being a bitter enemy. And this article basically talks about how this all got started and how the suffering of the Iranian people has Made in USA stamped on it. Because it goes all the way back to 1953, when the United States basically threw out the elected president of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and installed that tyrant, the Shah. And Mohammad Mossadegh was the democratically elected prime minister of Iran. He was deposed and imprisoned at the behest of Dwight Eisenhower and Winston Churchill, and it was all about getting Iran's oil at a discounted price. That's what it was about. Again, money, access to oil, pardon me. Over in Iraq, Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan is over there trying to visit and calm things down because the Prime Minister of Iraq is adamant there will be no permanent foreign bases in Iraq. The war is over. It is time for you to go. Now, the United States obviously wants to stay in Iraq, at least in Baghdad. They built that huge embassy, which appears more to be a regional military control center. And Iraq wants them gone. Iraq members of parliament see little reason for a large U.S. military presence to remain, and they're absolutely true. Will the U.S. leave? Of course not. They're garrisoning the world the way ancient Rome did. Meanwhile, even though the Taliban and Afghan officials are trying to talk peace and end the war, U.S. airstrikes are the highest in a decade. Last year, the U.S. dropped 7,362 weapons on Afghanistan in various air campaigns. That's the highest number of strikes since the Pentagon started releasing figures. But the fact of the matter is the airstrikes have done little to help matters on the ground. So, anyway, we'll see what happens there. I mean, that's kind of, to me, a dumb thing to do. When you're trying to talk peace and end a war, you send in more bombers. Russia's UN envoy, Vasily Nebenzia, speaking before the United Nations Security Council, is accusing the United States of being the puppet master behind the whole Maidan Theater, which overthrew Yanukovych and installed Poroshenko, and says that basically it is the United States that is encouraging Ukraine's provocations against Russia and then attempting to cover them up and protect them. And it does make sense. And again, it's great that this is getting out before the UN Security Council, but the UN Security Council will be absolutely helpless to do anything about it because of the United States' permanent veto. Sergei Lavrov is out there saying that the EU basically knuckled under to the United States on these new sanctions on Russia, and basically says it proves that the member states of the EU itself, really cannot make choices for themselves, that they are under the control of the United States. And again, we're heading in such a dangerous direction. You know, there are some days this show gets really, really hard to do when I'm looking at all this stuff and thinking about it here. By the way, have you noticed, and there's this article, again, Russia Today, we have this politically correct culture where you have to be very careful about what you say about other people, how you describe them. But this article points out it doesn't apply to Russians. You can say anything bad about Russians that you want. It's perfectly acceptable in our politically correct culture, along apparently these days with white people. Now, interestingly enough, even though the United States has pulled out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and Moscow is saying they will not deploy weapons, and now NATO is saying, well, we're not going to deploy any weapons either, at least for the moment. It's a push. I think maybe the NATO nations and Russia just don't want to go back to that very expensive and very dangerous practice of aiming missiles at each other all across Europe. And I'm sure the Europeans are going to breathe a sigh of relief at that news. I just hope that that's going to hold. Maybe NATO and Russia ought to negotiate their own Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Unfortunately, the United States is a member of NATO, and they're going to block it. But if NATO doesn't want to put the missiles in there and Russia doesn't want to put missiles in there, what's the United States plan? All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And the postal address, if you would like to support Republic Broadcasting, and we do need your help. There's no other way to say it. We need your help to stay on the air, to stay broadcasting. Pardon me. The postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit card or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. Okay, so Pompeo is still traveling all over Europe and, spreading U.S. militarism here. And he's out there making a statement saying that he's ready to help Europe reduce the risk of Russia's meddling in elections. This coming hard on the heels of that Senate intelligence report that said there was no collusion. Russia wasn't meddling at all. And I guess the message is, if anybody's going to meddle in the European elections, it will be the United States of America. But it's just, it's more propaganda. Ooh, Russia's bad. Russia's bad. Russia's doing all these horrible things. Now, the United States wants Poland to loosen their ties with China and Iran in exchange for military bases. In other words, Washington wants an increased U.S. military presence in Poland, which will bring money into Poland, and in exchange, Poland will refuse to engage in closer cooperation with China and Iran. So that's the deal. Be interesting to see what Poland decides they want to do, if they even want U.S. military bases. Ultimately, it's going to come down to a spreadsheet somewhere. How much are we getting from the U.S. military bases? And we're required to do more business with the United States, versus how much better off are we doing business with Iran and China, especially with that one road, one belt project coming along rapidly. Business with China is going to be very good. So we'll see what happens with that. Now, Netanyahu is confirming that Israel shelled the Syrian province. He says it's to prevent Iran entrenchment. The other day he said it was to target Hezbollah. And this put Netanyahu at odds with his own military commanders, who generally don't like to talk about these things. But apparently 8 buildings were damaged, including a hospital which was already vacated from previous strike, and an observation post. But no matter the excuse, Hezbollah or Iran, Israel is bombing somebody else's country, and that is an act of war. And I admire President Abbas' restraint. He has to know that if he tries to fight back, that's Israel's excuse to just come on in and go full bore. Actually, it will be America. It will be the United States coming back on in. Okay. So, apparently, there are accusations that the Lebanese movement, Hezbollah rather, is buying U.S. and British weapons and equipment from former members of the Free Syrian Army. This is one of the U.S.-backed splinter groups. And that's always a problem. When you go on in and you put these weapons into these areas, they start to spread on out, and they get into the hands of people who may not like this country. So, okay. Interestingly enough, as you know, there have been these protests, the Great March of Return along the Gaza border. Israel has been shooting a lot of people, killing a lot of people, injuring a lot of people. And some of the wounded have been suing for damages. And apparently the Israeli Supreme Court is saying that Israel is immune from all damages because these protesters were operating in an area defined by Israeli law as an enemy territory. So basically that's it. Palestinians in Gaza are not entitled to seek compensation from Israel because they live in an enemy entity. Just gets worse and worse for those Palestinian people here. And of course, if you look back at what's going on in Hebron, where Israel basically kicked out this multinational observer force, and the speculation now is that Israel now wants to basically move on Hebron itself. It's the largest Palestinian city in the West Bank, but Israel is already working to try and eject the Palestinians, and it looks like they just want to take it on over, and that's the reason they wanted the observers out. And there's another story that came on out from Middle East Monitor where Israel is preventing Palestinians from trying to document the Hebron settler crimes. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about events going on down in Israel, and as you know, they're coming up on elections in April. Netanyahu's poll numbers are heading down, and his primary challenger, Benny Gantz, his numbers are going up. We're still waiting to hear if Israel's Attorney General is going to just come out with those indictments. Apparently, Netanyahu asked them to be held off until after the elections. The Attorney General indicated that was not possible, but the indictments still have not come on down. If anybody was hoping that Benny Gantz might be an improvement on Benjamin Netanyahu, you're in for a disappointment, because in his campaign speeches, he's out there talking about how Israeli settlements are of strategic security and spiritual value. And apparently is out there saying he wants to strengthen the settlement blocks in the occupied Golan Heights, from which we will never retreat. The Jordan Valley, which is what they call the West Bank, will remain our eastern security border. So it's not going to be an improvement here. Now, Hamas representatives are up in Russia meeting with the Russian government, and they're trying to figure out a way to solve the Palestine crisis. And they said it's going to be based on several issues, starting with a rejection of the so-called deal of the century, which clearly the Palestinians don't want. It's a raw deal. First and foremost, I mean, it's completely one-sided in favor of Israel, including requiring the Palestinians to forego their right of return to their original homes and villages taken from them by the creation of the State of Israel. Now, the United Nations promised the Palestinians a right of return. Israel itself promised the Palestinians a right of return, and now they want to renege on the deal. So apparently one of the issues Hamas has raised is they do not see Gaza and the West Bank being separate independent states. It's all going to be one. Under who, we don't know, but there's been a lot of friction lately between the Palestinian Authority, which seems to be in a period of political chaos, and Hamas. Now here's a little bit of good news. Over in Maryland, Saeed Saqib Ali, he's a software engineer and a former state delegate. He's suing Governor Larry Hogan over this new anti-BDS law because he wants to apply for state contracts, and Maryland's law basically says that if you support boycott, divestment, sanctions, you are not allowed to engage in business with the state. And so Saeed is taking them to court, and I wish him a lot of luck. And basically, Saeed said, I want those contracts, but I'm not going to sign, a pledge, in support of Israel. So I'm glad he's going to stand his ground. And I hope this goes all the way to the Supreme Court, because this is, in fact, a First Amendment issue. And do you realize how bizarre it is? First of all, the stunner that so many of our congressional representatives and state representatives are working so hard to help Israel and to protect Israel. And we're turning into a country where it's perfectly okay to criticize the government of the United States of America, but don't you dare criticize the government of Israel. You can criticize the government of Great Britain. You can criticize the government of France. You can criticize the government of Japan. You can criticize the government of Australia, but don't you dare criticize Israel. You're being mean and anti-Semitic there. Over in Turkey, they have launched one of their largest operations yet against alleged supporters of the U.S.-based Muslim cleric who is suspected of leading that attempted coup back in 2016. And they have ordered the arrest of 1,112 people. Well, I remember when that one was going down. Everybody said, oh, yeah, they're toast. We're going to have a new puppet regime over there in Turkey. Now, here's an interesting little story. This is over in the Western Pacific, and this is coming from the British Reuters. U.S. lawmakers apparently yesterday got together for a little ceremony, a celebration, to tout the alliance between Japan, South Korea, and the United States, basically reinforcing the trilateral relationship. The problem is, of course, that right now, South Korea and Japan aren't really getting along all that well. Relations have chilled due to disputes over their wartime history, including Japan's 1910 through 1945 colonization of the Korean Peninsula, as well as allegations of provocations by each country's army. Some wounds apparently do not heal very easily here. One thing that Japan and South Korea do agree on, they see Washington as a major threat to global security. Now, back in 2013, only 1/4 of the people from 22 nations saw the United States as a threat to their countries. That figure jumped to 38% in 2017 and hit 45% last year. We're seeing protests all over. There are mass protests in Haiti. What a mess was made of Haiti, especially after that earthquake. The government is blatantly corrupt. Terrible mismanagement. What money was sent in to help the people of Haiti wound up being used to buy up real estate on which resorts are being built. So this neo-Duvalier era in Haiti, which has largely been put together by the United States, is starting to fall apart. So will the United States invade Haiti to protect their little regime there? They're going to be all over. Meanwhile, we have this drug war in Mexico, and it is getting bloody. Apparently 33,000 Mexicans, more than 33,000, were killed in 2018. And much of the violence is a result of the country's long-running drug war. The Mexican government began deploying its military forces around the country in 2006 to confront the drug cartels. Now, remember Fast and Furious? The United States was sending weapons down to those drug cartels. Think about that for a minute here. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Bill in Wisconsin. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, thank you, Michael, for taking the call. A number of things. Senator Ted Cruz has a bill to have El Chapo's assets seized.
Yes.
Supposedly, he has $14 billion in assets, and we could apply that for the wall.
Yeah,
so
he started talking about that back in 2017.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, Trump wants Mexico to pay for the wall. Why not have El Chapo do it? And I would bet that he's probably got CIA connections anyway. I'm surprised, that they've convicted him, but we'll see what happens. The other thing, have you ever heard of Michael Hoffman?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. He's got a book out, Aiea, before a Jewish group attempting to try to reconcile America's laws to the Talmud. An interesting picture, to say the least.
Well, you know,
Okay.
we have a lot of people who are calling into the show and posting articles on social media saying that U.S. law is basically Talmudic or it is Islamic or Sharia. And I think it's simple to say U.S. law is U.S. law is U.S. law. And it's basically the result of starting with the foundation of the Constitution, 200 plus years of everybody seeking to spin the government to their own personal advantage. And while I'm sure that people with a certain religious bent are going to try and influence the laws in their direction, I don't think there's any one religion that dominates our legal system, because that's actually prohibited by the First Amendment.
Well, I just thought it was interesting, and he was, you know, a real good friend of, you know, the lady there that's on the court that's supposedly alive or dead or whatever.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, yes.
Yeah, Ginsburg. The other thing, I watched that show last night, and, you know, just to see, the third individual was little Marco Rubio, okay? And
Yeah.
he looked nervous through the whole thing, you know, finding your roots. I'm sure he was concerned that they were going to talk about his background as a bubble dancer. But then...
I don't think that's what the show is about.
never
It's more about your
you oughta-
ancestry.
Yeah. But Paul Ryan, okay, his DNA test indicates that he has Ashkenazi Jewish background.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Well, those
Now,
Ashkenazis get around.
Yeah, and he didn't have a lot, but he had more Ashkenazi Jewish background, you know, than Elizabeth Warren has American Indian blood.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's two things to keep in mind. First of all, I don't know which DNA test they're doing on this program. I'm hoping it's going to be a bit more accurate than the home kits, which are very inaccurate. And there's yet another story out there about identical twins who took one of those tests and they got wildly differing results. But you need to understand that if you go back far enough through generation after generation after generation, everybody gets related to everybody else. And it's ridiculous to try and say, oh my goodness, this person had this ancestry and so forth. Modern genealogists, geneticists, if you will, in France are saying that every French person alive today is related to Charlemagne one way or the other. Apparently Charlemagne was really busy with all those French farm maids.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I thought it was interesting. And is it true, though, that when you do the DNA test through Ancestry, they own your DNA after that?
Yeah, that's a real problem, and that's true of all of the DNA testing services, where basically they say, we now own your DNA. And the idea for that is if they find something interesting in there, they get to patent it and profit from it. And of course, you know, they get to resell your DNA to like government databases and so forth and so on.
Sure, yeah. Well, that's all I got today.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call, and we're going to let you go. The phone lines are open now. Getting on back down to Mexico here, apparently they have got major strikes all across Mexico. These are Wildcat Strikes. They're expanding. It started in Matamoros, Mexico, and it's going across the country. And apparently it was started by tens of thousands of workers at 45 maquiladora plants who rebelled last month against the pro-corporate trade unions. And so apparently, along with the drug problems, they've got that now. This brings me to this article that came on out from WSWS.org, basically saying that it looks like there's an upsurge of working class struggles this year. And we've seen it. We saw it with France with the yellow vests. We've seen yellow vests in other countries. And we've had decades in which the class struggle has been suppressed by the trade unions, the working class, and I'm sorry, the working class and the ruling class. Basically, people are starting to get to their feet and say, this has gone on enough. And wealth inequality, again, it's at record levels in many parts of the world. And you can't have that and not eventually have a revolution. We saw that in revolutionary France. You know, prior to the revolution, I mean, if you looked at the poverty of the French people versus the nobility and the royalty with like Versailles, it was just absolutely insane here. So yeah, we are seeing a lot more protests. They're not getting coverage on the corporate media. There have been yellow vest protests in the United States, about 20 that I know of. They're getting, okay. Somebody said we could just copyright our own DNA and then sue the DNA testing companies when they try and resell it. Anyway, so yeah, people are protesting around the world. And I said, I think a couple of years ago, this push to create a global government could create a political climate leading to global revolution, and that may actually be happening. Okay, now the United States has just started producing a new nuclear warhead for the Trident submarine-launched ballistic missile. It's called the W-76-2, and it's a mini nuke. The Trident right now, the standard warhead, has about 100 kilotons. This little mini nuke is just 5 kilotons. It's a really tiny precision bomb. And the problem with it is that because it is so small, the inhibitions about using it just aren't going to be there. This thing is like 1/3 of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is still a lot of bomb. But as we edge closer and closer to a third world war and the possibility of a nuclear exchange, you know, having usable bombs, you know, it's a tactile, it's a nuclear hand grenade, if you will. We can go ahead and use that. This isn't a big deal here. And that is of concern, because once you start flinging nuclear weapons, who knows what's going to happen. Besides which, it's still going to shower its target with radioactivity. It's still a nasty, nasty weapon. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones here to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, when you were talking to your last caller there about how they spin the U.S. Constitution to suit their needs, and that was over, you know, like 200 years ago, you hit the nail right on the head. That's what it is right there.
Well,
what is the actual... Go ahead.
Okay, what I was saying was we started with the Constitution, then we started adding laws on top of it, but those laws were all being negotiated and debated and lobbied for by people who were trying to basically bias government activity in their favor, either as a business or a political entity or something. And so we have this incredible mishmash of laws, and we've gone a long way from the Constitution. And these days we have a federal government which is openly contemptuous of it, and a Supreme Court which unfortunately for the most part tends to turn a blind eye.
Exactly. And they do it incrementally so as not to, to gain attraction to what they're actually doing. It's how this has been happening for years and years and years now.
Yes.
You know, you just fly just a little bit under the radar and you just nibble away at something, and then next thing you know, it's like, oh my, look at this.
Yes.
What just happened? You know?
No, this
out there.
This has been underway since the end of the Civil War. That's when the United States really began to change, because a big part of what the Civil War was about was the Federalists were trying to intrude into the states' activity, and the states resented it, much like Brussels is intruding into the EU member states. And so that's why the Confederacy seceded. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted to go on running their nation the way the United States had been running up until that point. And Lincoln didn't want the Confederacy to leave because the Confederacy was a source of much revenue. So Lincoln came up with this idea of ending slavery and using that issue to get the Union soldiers to leap into the battlefield. But it was really about money.
Yep. Those southern ports didn't freeze over.
Yes, that's it. There's also that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about economics and politics and how they can, twist things to suit their own needs.
Well, look at the Affordable Care Act.
Oh, geez. It's not affordable.
No, it isn't. And it's not about care.
No, exactly. Healthcare is not about care. It's about selling people something.
Yes.
And get them to come back. Like you said this lots of times. You want repeat customers.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
No, there's actually an article up at whatreallyhappened.com about apparently Mexican scientists have found a cure for the HPV.
Yes.
But they're saying, curing people, there's no money in actually curing people. Anyway, got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification.
Thanks,
we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to go back to the phones to Philip in Virginia. Aloha, Philip. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Michael. I just saw on the news that Lyndon LaRouche died.
Oh, okay.
And I was wondering, he seemed like he had the number of a few people that, and he made some enemies over the years. His view on the Holocaust and the Bushes and the banking system, I think.
Yeah.
What was your take on him?
Well, I hadn't really been paying that much attention to him, to be very honest, and I was unaware that he'd passed. But I mean, he certainly seemed to be a man who spoke his mind, and that's a rarity in modern politics.
Yeah, I think, before there was James Traficant, there was Lyndon LaRouche. I think he got railroaded, didn't he? And they used tax laws to neutralize him as a political threat.
Yes.
He was definitely a political prisoner, if my memory serves correct. But yeah, it's sad, the way he was treated. I think he started out in Marxism, but he came to his senses somewhat, I think, in later years. But anyway, that's what I was wondering if you had any more information about the man. It seemed like some of the things that I've heard his positions on were pretty decent, so that's probably why they treated him like, Ron Paul, I guess, or Ross Perot or Ron Paul,
Yeah, can't let those outsiders in. It's a big club, and we're not in it.
You ain't in it.
Yep. All right, well, listen.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Philip.
Right.
We're going to let you go. All right. Okay. The first female pilot to lead the U.S. Air Force's Viper team was asked to leave after just 2 weeks on the job. This is coming from the Air Force Times. Captain Zoe Kotnick was commander of the F-16 Viper demo team, a fleet that performs complicated aerial stunts at widely seen events such as the Super Bowl. And they're not saying exactly what happened, but apparently Colonel Derek O'Malley relieved Kotnick of command due to his, quote, loss of confidence in her ability to lead and command, end quote. So, little interesting thing. Now, the four-star Admiral Phil Davidson, who's now head of the U.S. Pacific Command, was testifying before Congress, and basically he's responding Western Pacific, and the Navy report came on out, and it was just absolutely devastating. Crews were overworked. They were undertrained. The captain made major mistakes. Equipment wasn't working properly. The ships weren't actually even properly certified to be where they were doing what they were doing. So the admiral is trying to make this all go away. And he actually told the members in the hearing there, well, think about the 280 plus other ships that didn't have collisions. See, it's not that bad a thing. Yeah, $1 billion a pop, that's a bad thing. Anyway, remember Donald Trump's Space Force was going to be, in charge of outer space, get Buzz Lightyear to be the commander. And it was going to be a separate branch of the service. Well, that is no longer operative. Apparently, the United States Air Force has succeeded in grabbing control of what will eventually be the Space Force. And so the planning that had already gone into the Space Force is going to be turned over to the U.S. Air Force. And it's a sign that Pentagon leaders, many of whom oppose the notion of consolidating, have found a version they can support. So in the coming weeks, Acting Defense Secretary Shanahan is expected to sign a memo asking Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson to stand up a team that will figure out the bureaucratic nuts and bolts of the new space organization. And once again, I have to raise the hue and cry about just how dangerous it's going to be having satellites blowing each other up in orbit, because much of that debris will just go into other orbits and endanger other satellites. And you could get a cascade effect, or like a domino effect, if you will, where each new satellite that's destroyed puts out another 20, 30 pieces of rapidly moving debris. And it could literally just grind up everything in near-Earth orbit. Okay, the Pentagon is getting ready to ask Congress for a massive increase to a controversial war account, often described as a slush fund, in order to circumvent mandatory spending limits. And this increase would amount to a reversal for President Donald Trump's White House budget director, former Republican Representative Mike Mulvaney, who for years campaigned against what he saw as former President Obama's abuse of the account. So this is obviously not the black budget that they're talking about here. But again, it's Pentagon. More money, more money, more money. Before we give the Pentagon more money, let's get them to find, all that money that they lost. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. They just misplaced it. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network here. Let's talk about the economic news here. Apparently, 2/3 of bankruptcy filings in the United States are from medical expenses. And it underscores, first of all, the high cost of medical care in this country. And second, the fact that insurance policies are loaded with loopholes and exceptions and all kinds of trapdoors, deductibles. If you have a major illness, it can put you in the poorhouse. And again, as we were talking about with that other caller, medical care in this country is not about care. It's not about medicine. It's all about money. And it's been that way ever since Nixon signed the Health Maintenance Organization Act for his good buddy over at Kaiser. China has taken over Scotland's oil production and now controls 2 of the North Sea's biggest oil fields. And according to analysis of China National Offshore Oil Corporation's accounts, a CNOOC-owned company, Nexen, extracts nearly 200,000 barrels of oil per day across these 2 fields. That makes it the largest producer in the area. So, and apparently China was able to do this because former Chancellor George Osborne gave tax breaks for oil companies in that North Sea. U.S. is out there making war. China's making deals. They're producing product. General Motors apparently made $11.8 billion in profits in 2018. And Now it plans to shut 5 factories in the U.S. and Canada and let go more than 14,000 people. So how much of that profit is actually from selling product, cars, versus just economic financial manipulation? So, a plan known as the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, which has been introduced in the Senate by Senators Mike Lee and Kamala Harris, would eliminate the U.S. country caps in the legal immigration system and would fast-track outsourcing of white-collar American jobs to mostly Indian and Chinese nationals imported to the country by businesses, outsourcing firms, and multinational corporations, because they will work for less than the American people. Kamala Harris was on board with this. So basically, this law would fast track up to 300,000 green cards and eventual American citizenship to primarily Indian nationals in the U.S. on the H-1B visa, as long as they agree to take these high-paying white-collar jobs from Americans. So they're being used to try and drive down wages and salaries, which is a fool's errand. Now, the reason Americans need to make a certain amount of money is most of them are encumbered by debt. Remember that story that we had yesterday where something like 7 million Americans are 3 months behind on their car payment? If Americans were all debt-free, you know, we could afford to work for less and start rebuilding the economy. But these foreign nationals coming on in, they're not coming in with mortgages and car loans or anything like that. I assume they get a car after they get here. But they don't have these mortgages. They can afford to work for less. The problem being that we have a government whose debt just topped 22 trillion with a T dollars. And they like to scream that tax revenues are up, tax revenues are up. It's kind of hard to see where that's all coming from, with wages and salaries being driven down into the basement. Something is not adding up. Now, out in California, the most ambitious infrastructure project in America is basically failing. And this is California's high-speed rail system that was going to get from Sacramento to San Diego and from San Francisco to Los Angeles. And California Governor Gavin Newsom basically said, we're dialing it back, and they're going to complete the section in California's Central Valley running from Merced to Bakersfield. That's a distance of only 150 miles. What made his announcement very interesting is if you look at the photo of him making the announcement, there's a chart on the back wall of California's economy, and it's captioned, California will lose $25 billion in the next of revenue in the next recession. And on the bottom of the chart is basically, you know, a graph, and there is a dotted line coming down right into 2019. So I think we know that recession is definitely on its way. Okay. So it was just too expensive. I wonder if that's going to happen to our little train. Now, ours is not a high speed, it's a light rail. But it's billions over budget, years behind. And I talk about it to a lot of people who live here, and more people are convinced they're never actually going to see that thing work. And even if they get it to work, it'll never turn a profit. It's too deeply in debt. It's going to be tax subsidized for as long as it runs. Interestingly enough, last December, Turkey's President Erdogan traveled to Caracas, Venezuela, and met Maduro. And apparently, one of the deals they came up with is Turkey is going to process Venezuelan gold. And the gold will be refined in Comm and basically send it back as finished bullion bricks. So that's another reason why the U.S. wants to go into Venezuela. They've got gold down there and not just the one in the vault. Meanwhile, Venezuela is hoping to create a non-dollar trading bloc consisting of China, India, and Russia, and basically trying to settle payments, oil payments in currencies other than the dollar, which is being weaponized against them. Oh, and here's a little story. You probably heard about this over the last few days. Over in Connecticut, they found basically this suitcase with a dead girl in it. They found the guy who did it. And yes, he's in the United States illegally. Another good argument for making sure our immigration system works here. Over in Finland, dealing with their rising problems from open borders, there's a vigilante group calling themselves Soldiers of Odin, and they're basically out there saying they're going to go after rapists, pedophiles, and so forth and so on. And they're saying Finland has basically been overrun by sex tourists. And there was this grooming gang scandal, which involved immigrants and asylum seekers from the Middle East. And the Soldiers of Odin are saying that they're not specifically targeting the immigrants and asylum seekers, but about half of everybody that they're finding that is like propositioning underage girls are among those immigrants and refugees. So how's that open border thing working out for you? Italy is going to explore bilateral ties for World Trade Organization Brexit over fear of losing trade. And it's a complicated headline, but basically what it's coming down to is Italy's populist Eurosceptic government is examining a potential bilateral agreement with Great Britain in the event of a no-deal Brexit to basically make sure trade continues. Now, Great Britain is Italy's third largest food products market after Germany and the United States. And so all those doomsayers who are out there saying a no-deal Brexit will signal starvation and catastrophe and we're going to have to put out there. No, deals are being made. The trade deals are already being made. Up in Ireland, the Democratic Unionist Party Member of Parliament Gregory Campbell has accused Remainers John Mayer and Tony Blair of trying to exploit the fears of people living along the Irish border as they continue their campaign to prevent Brexit from happening. And Campbell made the comments after Tony Blair said that there would be devastating consequences for Northern Ireland if Great Britain left the EU without a deal, while Mr. Major said there'd be a return to sectarian violence. Campbell, in an interview in the Belfast Telegraph, said these two former prime ministers should be more responsible in their language. Yeah, it's a lot of fear-mongering here. Jacob Rees-Mogg is warning that if Brexit is delayed past the EU elections, which are July, that Tommy Robinson could win the European elections. So that's something they need to look at. Some of the rhetoric coming out is very questionable. Guy Verhofstadt is comparing Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, and Michael Gove to the leaders of the French Revolution, and then following up by reminding that the first leaders of the French Revolution were sent to the guillotine by the second leaders of the Revolution. So there's an implied threat there. But right now, the European Union is not equipped to deal with big political questions. What its knee-jerk reaction is basically pushing back against serious problems by simply asserting over and over and over again its own internal doctrines and hierarchies. They're not adaptable, and this approach is not suited to the troubles at hand. So right now, the EU is dealing with three problems. It has to decide whether to risk the economic shock of Brexit without a transition, and it must do so with the specter of recession hanging over the Eurozone's three largest economies, and as the French and German governments seek to maintain a united front with Britain to block U.S. sanctions on Iran. Well, you wanted the job here. Here's another article, this one coming out of Unheard.com. And it's commenting on the fact that France withdrew its ambassador to Italy last week. And this was the first time this happened since Mussolini declared war on France back in 1940. So apparently tensions are building between France and Italy, and there have been a series of jibes, insults, and accusations. And most have come from the populist coalition government in Italy and its number two Matteo Salvini. And this article is titling it The 2019 Franco-Italian War. So it's a mess. It's a mess. George Soros really messed up Europe for everybody here. Okay, a little bit of good news for fans of quality education. After spending $400 million on forcing schools around the country to adopt Common Core, Bill Gates has finally admitted the teaching method is a failure and significantly less effective than traditional teaching methods. So there we are. Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to talk about this a little bit more. Bill Gates, who spent $400 million forcing schools around the country to adopt Common Core, has finally admitted the teaching method is a failure and less effective than traditional teaching methods. And, of course, parents and teachers across the country have been saying, we've got to get rid of it, that it deliberately dumbs down children and creates unnecessary and complicated methods for working out relatively simple problems. And I got to see some of that. The way they were teaching math, it was absurd. It was like they were trying to mentally cripple kids so that they couldn't solve simple math problems in their head. And so it's been 8 years. And so finally, Bill Gates is admitting that his and Barack Obama's baby, Common Core, is a failure. So that's part of the legacy right there. Elon Musk is wading into this, explaining why traditional schooling is useless. And I don't know what he's planning on putting in its place. But there is no question that our children have suffered from Common Core. They're not really prepared to like go to college. They like need remedial education. Okay. 900 teachers just got laid off from the Los Angeles Unified School District. They are $650,000 over their annual budget. And teachers are going public and saying there are problems. And America needs to wake on up. A big part of the issue, of course, is all of the illegal immigrants who are pouring into California, and they go to school and they use up resources. And it basically means that because the resources are limited, resources are being taken away from the legal children. And that's not fair. Donald Trump Jr. is being slammed by educators for making a comment about, quote, loser teachers, end quote, indoctrinating American children with socialism from birth. Well, I wouldn't have used the term loser teacher, but he's absolutely correct. Modern education, especially under Common Core, was less about education and more about indoctrination. And we know that the left and socialists have targeted schools and education to sell their agenda to the American people, to the next generation. If they can't convert the present generation, by golly, they're going to brainwash the next one here. Now, this story is a little bit weird. This happened in North Carolina. Apparently, a substitute teacher was forced to resign after she told the class that Martin Luther King Jr. committed suicide. I guess anybody can be a substitute teacher these days. I remember when I was in high school, we had a substitute teacher where when he'd come in, all he would do was play Bill Cosby records, and another one that would do magic tricks. All right, here we go into the realm of political correctness. Women are suing Yale University and fraternities to force the fraternities to gender integrate. We've seen a lot of this, but here is the reason. The suit's plaintiffs believe that the most direct route to prevent sexual harassment and assault and to challenge the gender disparities is to integrate Yale's fraternities by gender. And all three women said they've been groped at fraternity parties, So yeah, their thinking is, let's have the women actually move into the fraternities, and that will solve the problem. And I'm just waiting for somebody to say, okay, if the fraternities are forced to gender integrate, then so must the sororities. Anyway. Okay, the Rutherford Institute has filed a Fourth Amendment lawsuit against government officials who allowed a disabled war veteran to carry 2 firearms through a security checkpoint only to arrest him for lawfully purchasing canned iced tea, bug spray, light bulbs, and razor blades, which are banned as part of the city's preemptive measures to discourage civil unrest, because they're coming up on the anniversary of the removal of a controversial Confederate statue. And a district court judge later dismissed the charges against 64-year-old John Miska, ruling the ordinance used to justify the veteran's arrest was overbroad, unreasonable, and therefore unenforceable. So it's getting kind of weird. So basically, Charlottesville is planning a preemptive state of emergency lockdown in anticipation of the 1-year anniversary of the August 12th, 2018 racially charged protests and counter-protests. Okay, remember David Hogg? Good old David Hogg. He's out there, once again saying that, no, we don't need armed teachers, we don't need armed guards at the school. All we have to do is improve the ambulance response time. This is from the darling of the gun grabbers. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here and getting into the world of computers. A little bit of good news. Donald Trump is basically compelling federal agencies to step up research and development of artificial intelligence. He signed a new executive order. He calls the U.S. lead in AI of paramount importance to America's national security. Good assessment. I'm not sure we're that much in the lead compared to Japan. But apparently Trump signed this order on Monday, and it warns the U.S. government against falling behind its strategic competitors in the race for AI supremacy. And says, continued American leadership in the high-tech sector is of paramount importance to maintaining the economic and national security of the U.S. Okay, he's right about that. No question about that. Apparently, IBM's artificial intelligence debater, they called it the IBM debater, was supposed to be a machine that could debate a human. And they put it up against Harish Natarajan, the grand finalist at the 2016 World Debating Championships, and the human won. So they've got a ways to go on that one. I don't think you can have an AI that is going to really be effective unless it's got a long life and experience. I mean, that's what AIs are doing. They're learning. But how much can you learn in just a few hours or a few weeks? Anyway, hackers broke into email provider VF Email, and they wiped the servers of all data in the U.S. And the founder, Rick Romero, confirmed the attack, saying, yes, VF Email is effectively gone. It will likely not return. I never thought anyone would care about my labor of love so much that they'd want to completely and thoroughly destroy it. Now, VF Email aimed to offer users a better email experience by scanning messages and attachments for malware before they got to your inbox. Well, that tells us who would want that system to go away, the purveyors of malware. They don't want anything getting in the way of getting into your machine. I think that's pretty obvious there. Alrighty. Now, over in Israel, they've got this spyware firm, NSO Group, and they sell this smartphone hacking software. Allegedly, it helped Saudi Arabia track and ultimately kill journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Mexico's allegedly using the same software to monitor human rights lawyers and government critics. And there are a lot of people who are criticizing NSO Group and what they're doing because their software is not going into the hands of anybody with the authority to be spying. So undercover operatives allegedly approached and tried to discredit critics of NSO Group. This was reported in the Associated Press. Okay. Over at InfoWars, they had this former Google engineer who hails the YouTube censorship campaign as an historic victory, and now is trying to look into Jordan Peterson videos and find out why so many people are watching them. And it's very alarming that these big tech engineers, or even former big tech engineers, they have been sold on the idea that censorship is good. And I'm sure they've been told that your job is to get rid of, fake news like flat earth and everything. And maybe they don't understand that what is being targeted is anything that challenges the official view about anything like human-caused global warming, vaccine safety, and so forth here. Over in Great Britain, they have this absolutely draconian law where clicking on terrorist propaganda even once could mean 15 years in prison. Now, there had been calls to have it more than one. A United Nations inspector accused the government of straying towards thought crime with the proposal, which originally stated that people would have to access propaganda on 3 or more different occasions to commit a terror offense. But that benchmark has been removed from the draft law. Journalists and academic researchers or people who had no reason to believe they were accessing terror propaganda are exempt. So, Cisco has closed a deal to buy optical semiconductor firm Luxtera for $660 million US. Luxtera, of course, makes fiber optic cables and the emitters and detectors. And so this is going to really put Cisco into a good position of using photonics for enterprise and web-scale networking. It will be much faster than the cables that we're using right now. Okay, Google Play has been caught hosting yet another malicious app. This one was designed to steal cryptocurrency from unwitting end users. And the malware masqueraded as a legitimate cryptocurrency app, and it worked by replacing wallet addresses copied into the clipboard with one belonging to the attackers. And so your cryptocurrencies would just disappear. And Google is not being as careful about keeping malware out of their little system as they used to be here. Apparently, there's a new and very serious data scandal with the iPhone. Apple is being asked to shut down. This goes back to a story we did last week about how private companies were now able to track you and spy on you through the phone. We're talking entities that don't have warrants to be looking at you or anything. And there are a number of major companies who are secretly recording every move on the iPhone apps without permission. And these are apps that are given away for free by various commercial operations like Abercrombie and Fitch, Air Canada, Expedia, Hollister, Hotels.com, Singapore Airlines, among many others. And apparently the apps were all created by the same company called Glassbox. And again, they're just harvesting data from you. And what they're trying to do is, it's almost like Minority Report. They're trying to figure out what you might be interested in buying next, which would certainly solve the problem of getting tons of email ads for things you just bought yesterday. What is really obvious, though, and the recommendation from this article is you should not use your smartphone for financial transactions ever. And I'm in agreement. Claire and I wouldn't do that. Basically, they say, get a cheap laptop that is dedicated to your financial work. No other apps for movies, travel, or anything. You need to literally segregate and firewall your financial transactions from the rest of your activities. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. It's become a real jungle out there. It's open season on computer users everywhere. And nobody's doing anything about this. Of course, it's big business for all the anti-malware, antivirus companies. They're making money hand over fist. People are scared of having their computers broken into. Now, Activision Blizzard, this is the company behind these game franchises, Call of Duty, Candy Crush, Overwatch, Warcraft, Hearthstone, and Diablo. They are having to lay off 8% of their employees, about 770 people, as part of the company deprioritizing initiatives that are not meeting expectations. It means some games that just aren't drawing in the crowds and cranking up those in-app purchases. So, anyway, getting close to the end of the show. It's time to talk about human-caused global warming. We're up to Winter Storm Nadia now, and it is just tearing through the Midwest, canceling over 2,000 flights. 100,000 people are without power. 6 to 12 inches of snow from northern Wisconsin to northern Michigan, and the storm is heading for the New England area. Apparently, out in Washington State, up at Snoqualmie Pass, which Claire and I used to go to all the time when it was summer, apparently more than 250 motorists are stranded at the summit of Snoqualmie Pass. Now, it's not entirely desperate. There is a ski resort up there, which I presume is open, and these stranded motorists can take shelter in there. But apparently, they've had avalanches that have come down off the sides of the mountains from Winter Storm Nadia. And more than 24,000 customers remain without power in Washington State. I remember those Washington State winters. They could get very intense here. Moscow had their strongest snowstorm in 140 years, and apparently the Muscovites enjoyed it. They went on out with their cameras and smartphones and started flooding social networks with these picture postcard views of the city. I mean, let's face it, every city looks much better in the snow because it's clean and it's white and it's bright. Okay. And of course, we're still dealing with our snow issue down here. Over at Poli Poli State Park on Maui was blanketed with snow, first time ever. It's never happened before. So, Puxatawny Phil, I don't know. I'm losing confidence in you. Over in New Jersey, Governor Murphy is apparently preparing to sign a rain tax into law, supposedly to prop up the state's pension system. I'm not even sure how that would be assessed or collected, but that's the new idea. We're going to tax the rain. Well, I don't think the rain is actually the property of the state of New Jersey. What can I tell you? All right, a little bit of space news here as we come up to the end of the program. NASA has officially declared the rover Opportunity to be dead. And it's a little sad, but, you know, after 15 years, that little rover just did yeoman's work. But they sent the last attempt to try and contact it yesterday, did not get a reply. And so OPI, as the flight controllers like to call it, is now officially declared to be non-functional. Meanwhile, in a more recent experiment, remember the InSight Mars lander, the one that is hunting Mars quakes and is going to drill a really deep core into the soil? It's been spotted from space by the reconnaissance orbiter, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. And so, nice little confirmation that it is where they think it is. And of course, one of the instruments on board the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is a camera called HiRISE, which is able to capture detailed images of the Martian surface here. Okay, remember Ultima Thule? It was this object beyond Pluto, and it was imaged by the New Horizons spacecraft. And the very first pictures that came on in, it looked like it might be a snowman, basically two spherical objects just barely touching each other. Well, New Horizons has finally managed to send back the rest of the data from the flyby, and seen from the side, it turns out it's not a snowman after all. The larger of the two objects is actually flat. In fact, it's being described as a pancake, and the other object is kind of oblate. It's being described as a walnut. But it turned out it's not the space snowman, and gosh darn for everybody who thought it was going to turn out to be that. So, New Horizons is now on its way to another extra Pluto object. It's got enough fuel to get there. And so it's amazing to see all this stuff. And it's amazing for me because, again, reminding everybody how old I am, I was born before there was any of this stuff. I was born before Sputnik. All of this stuff, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Viking, all happened in my lifetime. What an amazing thing to see just grow up and develop. And I know for young people today, oh, there's always been a space program. Yeah, men walked on the moon some time ago. I got to watch it all unfold. I remember being out there at night. The local newspapers would have predictions for when the Echo would fly over. The Echo was an early experiment in passive radio repeating, and it was just this giant mylar balloon. And it was, it was launched into orbit and then inflated, and it was something like 100 feet across. And with that mylar, it was very shiny, and it really stood out. Okay, we've got the rain coming on down. They're forecasting thunderstorms for tonight here. Okay, Elon Musk is doing much better with SpaceX than he's doing with Tesla. And they're getting ready to fly the first demonstration mission of its Crew Dragon capsule to the International Space Station on March 2nd, coming up real quick. Now, this is going to be uncrewed. It's just a system test. But if all goes well, Crew Dragon will start carrying astronauts to and from the orbiting lab this summer, at which point the United States will not have to go through that embarrassing situation of saying bad things about the Russians and then asking for a lift. Now, SpaceX's newest rocket engine was test-fired and reached the power level necessary for the company's next round of rocket designs. They're going to start building them bigger and bigger. The engine is called the Raptor, and it reached the power level needed for Starship and Super Heavy. These are the two designs they're going forward with. Okay, do you remember this Dutch company was called Mars One? And it planned to send humans on a one-way trip to Mars to start the first human colony on the Red Planet. Unfortunately, it has now gone bankrupt, and I really didn't think they were going to have much of a success anyway. But they're still out there trying to find another investor to move the project forward. Let's see, what was that other organization? There was another organization that wants to build the first civilian permanently manned space station in orbit and actually call it a nation. It'll come back to me later on. I get tired in the third hour. What can I tell you here? All right. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Scientists are saying we are entering the 6th major extinction in the history of our planet. And a brand new survey of 73 scientific papers reports that was just released has come to the conclusion the total number of insects on the globe is falling by 2.5% per year. They're calling it the insect apocalypse. And the survey warns that at this rate, there may not be any insects at all by the year 2119, which would be a problem because insects are critical to the worldwide food chain. So they're out there saying they don't understand why. Well, there's two areas to look into. Oh, we've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, last segment of our program today. And we're talking about various science-related stories here. This is kind of a little bit scary. Apparently over in India, they found a missing radioactive cesium-137 canister in a scrapyard. And I think, if I recall correctly, there was a similar incident in Brazil some years ago, where somebody had simply tossed a medical radiotherapy machine without properly disposing of the isotope. And scrap dealers came on in, they tore the machine apart for bits and pieces, and they found that capsule and opened it. And oh, this pretty blue glowing stuff here. And it was one of the worst nuclear accidents involving cesium in history. So they dodged a bullet on this one. Apparently over in Lower Saxony, radioactive material is being stored in the Aas mine, and a state in northwest Germany bordering the North Sea. And this has many locals frustrated. This stuff is not being properly disposed of. It's just being stuck in little dark places where we hope people won't notice it. You know, but mines can cave in. I mean, look at all the problems they're having out there in Hanford. Boy, this planet is just in a world of hurt. Okay, last story for today. Do you remember Jared Fogle? Jared Fogle was this spokesman for Subway, where he, you know, basically had been overweight, and he went to Subway and he was eating all the healthy sandwiches, and he lost a lot of weight, and he became their spokesman. He was all over TV and quite famous, notorious. Then, unfortunately, the darker side of his life came on out, and he was sentenced to 15 years for child pornography. But apparently, you know, he was sent to this minimum security facility, and apparently he's doing very well there. Apparently he's received a Culinary Arts Award. An ex-inmate is revealing that Jared's cell is never locked, and he's free to use the computer and to gamble. It's almost like a country club over in there. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. Of course, everybody who's familiar with the show knows how I feel about any abuse of children. And so I have very strong instincts about that. Okay, so we're coming up here on the end of the show here. And it's amazing, all the stuff that's we've talked about today here. And we're seeing a lot more stuff coming on out that I'm going to have to bring into the show tomorrow. Apparently, Bill Gates is also trashing the new Green Deal, saying it's extreme. All right, there's the music. I got to get out of here. I got stuff I got to do. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. And please share what you learn here with your friends and family and everybody that you know. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow, and aloha, America.